Good afternoon, gentle YouTubers. It's me, Logan Albright, back here again with another book review. And today I want to talk about George Orwell's classic dystopian novel, 1984. Now, I usually try to keep politics out of this channel. I'm not going to say who I support, who I don't support, who I'm against. If you want to know that about me, it's easy enough to find out. But in light of what's going on in the news right now, I can't get my mind off of 1984. And specifically the aspects of 1984 that deal with how governments use propaganda and language manipulation to control the population. I don't have a copy of 1984 to hold up and show you, but they are easy to obtain. You can get one anywhere. I'm sure you can get them on an ebook, probably close to for free at this point. You know, it's been a long time. It's been 70 years since Orwell died, I believe. I think he died in 1950. So at that point, it should be out of copyright by now. Maybe you can even get one for free. Project Gutenberg or something like that. I was inspired to make this video after the latest round of news about the supposed Russian assets. We have been told that Bernie Sanders is a Russian asset. We've been told that Tulsi Gabbard is a Russian asset. We've been told that Donald Trump is a Russian asset. Basically anybody who the media or the establishment or the kind of shadowy enforcement agencies like the FBI and CIA don't like. Anyone they don't like is being accused of working with Russia and being a Russian asset. And this really made me think of 1984. Now, George Orwell was primarily, I would say, a journalist more than a novelist. He wrote a couple of really good novels. 1984 is one of them. Animal Farm is another. And the story's pretty good. I think most people will be familiar with the story by now. It's about a totalitarian state that has mass surveillance and controls every aspect of the citizens' lives. And it's about this one man, Winston Smith, and his kind of journey to try to escape that situation. I don't want to delve too much into that because people know it pretty well. Most people have read it in high school. And honestly, the plot is okay, but it's not amazing. There are other dystopian novels I like more. I particularly like Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 and Ayn Rand's Anthem. I think those are better books from a storytelling perspective. That being said, George Orwell's work is incredibly prescient, and it's astonishing to imagine that it was written 70 years ago. It originally came out in 1949, just after the Second World War, and in the wake of the ideas of fascism and Nazism and communism in the Soviet Union and what went wrong there. Although George Orwell was a socialist, he recognized the problems with the USSR and the kind of totalitarian nature that state took on, and he wanted to critique it, and that's what he did with 1984. But it feels like it was written yesterday. It's unbelievable. Most people probably haven't read it in some time. If you've read it at all, you probably read it in high school or college. I urge you to go back and look at it again and reread it because it's amazing how contemporary it feels. It does an incredible job of pointing out the ways in which the government will manipulate people using language and using propaganda. Specifically, with reference to the Russiagate stuff, there's this whole theme in the novel about how the government uses scapegoats. And there are these three major countries, and it'll say, we're at war with this one country, and we've always been at war with them, and the other one is our friends, and they blame all the evils in the world on the other country that they're at war with. And then, without telling anybody, they'll switch, and they'll say, no, the other country is the one we've always been at war with. We've always been at war with Eurasia or East Asia, and they've always been at war with us. And they'll switch it up. They'll move it around. They'll say, oh, now it's East Asia, now it's Eurasia, but they never admit that it's changed. They say it's always been that way, and they expect people to believe it. And I think it's funny, just the transparency with what you see that exact same thing happening now. You see the media and the political class, the commentary class, saying things like, oh yeah, well, Russia's behind this candidate, Russia's behind that candidate. It's just so clearly not true. It's so clearly a propaganda tactic to try to manipulate who people are going to vote for. It's crazy, and it echoes so true to 1984 for me. And there's a similar thing about the use of language. 1984 is famous for the invented language that Orwell came up with called newspeak, where they tried to remove any kind of language that had emotional or revolutionary connotation, keep everything as bland and as saccharine as possible to prevent people from thinking thoughts that could be potentially revolutionary or dissident. And I think you see a lot of that today with sort of the speech police. You're not allowed to say this word, you have to say this word, you have to use these terms, you can't use those terms. And the way that politicians speak is very circular and trying to avoid making declarative statements, because when you make a declarative statement, people can disagree with you. And when they disagree with you, then they can vote against you. But if you say vague things, then people can't disagree with you. They have to sort of agree because there's nothing of substance you're saying that they can disagree with. I think Orwell's genius was in observing that this was happening in politics, and not only that it was happening in his own time, because otherwise the book would just be a relic of the 40s, but it always happens. It's a constant thing that goes on in politics and in government, where you always have these same tricks being played over and over again, and people never get wise to them, because like I said, it's 70 years gone from the publication of this book, and they're still using the same tricks, and they're as transparent as ever. They're barely even trying to hide them. So on the off chance you haven't read 1984, if you're a fan of science fiction, if you're a fan of dystopian literature, it is a great read, and you should definitely read it. It's a classic. Like I said, there's other ones that I think have slightly better stories or are slightly more well-written, but in terms of being observant of the way that politics works and being a social critique, you can't do better than 1984. And I think all the best science fiction has an element of social commentary in it. And it always has an element of satire or commentary on the current situation. You saw that in like the original Star Trek series, the original Twilight Zone series. There was always a little bit of social commentary going on, and all the best science fiction has that. It's not just lasers and space and aliens. It's got some kind of idea that's applicable to the modern world. And although I'm not really a fan of allegory per se in literature, I do think it's valuable sometimes to have broader, deeper themes that can be applicable to a variety of situations. And Orwell certainly excels at that. Animal Farm is also a fabulous work that has a lot of comparisons that are applicable to the modern world, and that book was specifically a critique of Stalinism and what happened in the Soviet Union after the rise of communism. Of course, there's many other aspects of 1984 that can be applied to today's society. There's the whole thing about Big Brother and the surveillance state and people losing their privacy. There's a lot of resonance with that today. It suffers from being, I guess it suffers from its own popularity, in that it's become so well known and it's become kind of trite and a cliche to compare government to Big Brother and to compare things to 1984. And so in that regard, it sort of suffers from this effect when something becomes so influential and so popular. On TV tropes, they talk about it with the sitcom Seinfeld, about how Seinfeld was so groundbreaking and unique that it's been copied to death, and now people don't find the original show that interesting or funny because they've seen so many things that are derivative of it. And the same thing happens with like the Beatles music and things like that. 1984 suffers from a little bit of that because it was so influential and so many things have copied it and used the same formula that it may seem a little bit cliche now to go back and read it. But again, as an observer of the way that society works and the way that government works, I just think that Orwell was unmatched, and his understanding of language and thought is unmatched. So I really, in these trying times that we suffer through, ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to go back, reread your Orwell. I think it can be very enlightening, and it'll help you understand what's going on in the current presidential election. It's just amazing. It's dead on. Orwell foresaw it perfectly, and I hope that it will change in the future, but for now, we're stuck in the world that Orwell envisioned to a large extent. I don't want to overstate the case, but you certainly see parallels. In any case, if you haven't read it, you should read it. If you have read it, you should reread it. It's a classic that everyone should have delved into at least once, even if you think you already know what it's about and you think you already kind of understand the point of it. I just think there's a lot to be gained from a more in-depth analysis of 1984. There's also a bit in there about the metric system that I find incredibly apt, but I'll save that for another time. I don't want to go on a metric system rant right now. I've been Logan Albright, and thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this and want to see more content like it, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. I promise most of my videos are completely apolitical. I just wanted to get this off my chest because I'm watching the returns in the Democratic primary and all the crazy accusations and the commentary that's going on around it, and I just couldn't get 1984 out of my head. So I won't do that next time. Next week, I'm about to finish Nicholas Nickleby pretty soon, so I'll be doing a review of that by Charles Dickens, and that will be charmingly apolitical. So come back and watch that. Until then, I'll catch you next time.